The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello people of Norfolk, I'm back again. You've got 2 weeks worth of Norfolk stuff coming up on TVI this week and next week, and in both weeks we'll be starting brand new districts. Welcome for the first time to Breckland. Behind me there you can see we have a watermill. Norfolk's got plenty of those, and I think this one is up there with one of the best. It stands on the River Wensum, which is the river that flows through Norwich. This is Bintree. Bintree. Hello folks in Norfolk, I'm back again. This time we're in another brand new area, Breckland, which is the bit of land just to the west of Norwich primarily. Today we're in Bintree in the Wensum Valley. It's a small parish, but it packs in more history than you'd expect. The name Bintree has been written in a few different ways over time, including B-I-N-T-R-Y, a spelling that's still seen at its old watermill. The name likely comes from Old English, meaning something like Binner's tree, or the tree belonging to Binner. Bintree appears in medieval records, and we know for sure that by the 1400s the watermill was already active. The rest of the place grew slowly, with cottages, farms and small holdings forming the core of the settlement. Schools, chapels, pubs and even a naval training school came later. The landmark that best defines Bintree now is that watermill. It has a timber lucum sticking out at the western end, whilst the old wheel race still runs beneath it, even though the wheel was removed in 1947. The mill has even starred on TV. Bintree has a surprising number of other landmarks. St Swithin's Church has a 14th century tower, a rare Norman piscina and some Victorian stained glass. The former Methodist chapel on Mill Road opened in 1877 and served for 124 years before becoming a home. Bintree doesn't have any grand legends, but it has plenty of local tales tied to its buildings. St Swithin's has one to tell concerning Father Richard Enrot, a rector who was imprisoned for his ritual practices in the 1890s. The parish also has links to the Outlaw family, a mob that included Ralph Outlaw, rector in the 1600s, whose memorial still sits inside the church. The Watts Naval School brought in teachers, naval officers and hundreds of boys who trained for sea careers over the decades. Recent years have seen big changes in Bintree. The Royal Oak pub is the main one. That reopened after a major 2-year rebuild by the Wilkinson family, bringing new life to a lovely old 17th century building that nearly became housing. Historically, Bintree's biggest employers were farming, milling and the Watts Naval School. The pubs, the chapel and the former primary school all provided local work, I suppose, as well, but today employment is more scattered. Farming remains, while small businesses operate from homes. In Bintree then, we're about to step into a village full of things we all love to see on TVI. Every corner has a link to something older. It's a little one, but wander through it and you'll get such a reward. Let's go out there and see it.
Hello everybody, I've got quite a bit for you here in Bintree. I'll be on the old watermill, the church, the Royal Oak pub and on the former Watts Naval School, which sat to the west of it all. See you in a mo.
Okay, so via that quite bumpy road, we've come over a weak bridge and we've ended up here at Bintree Watermill. This will kick us off.
This is Bintree Watermill, which is sometimes spelt Bintry instead of the spelling the village has. It sits on the River Wensum just outside Bintree and has been a mill site since 1454. The present mill dates from the 1750s. The building is made from red Norfolk brick and rises 4 stories high. The southwestern side has 3 bays and the northwestern side has 2 neat columns of windows that line up. The lower floors date from the 18th century, while the top floor was added in the 19th. At the western end, there's a timber lucum, which is basically a covered hoist that sticks out so sacks could be lifted inside. The wheel race still runs under the mill, but the water wheel itself was taken out in 1947 to make room for electric machinery. Over the road, a bridge with a dentilled cornice marks where the water once flowed back into the river after turning the wheel. The corner of the mill is actually cut away, so the road can sweep around it. So there's a slightly unusual shape to this one now. Attached to the eastern side is the miller's cottage, which is a great little property in its own right. It has a checkered brick gable end, a Georgian door case, and a 19th century roof, which was later raised so that 2 dormer windows could be added. In 1996, the BBC used the mill as a filming location for their adaptation of George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss, which eventually aired on New Year's Day, 1997. It was also used in 1989 for an episode of Campion called Sweet Danger.
Now, as nice as Bintree Watermill is, and don't get me wrong, it is really nice, you stand next to it, you definitely do appreciate the old sort of history around it. It's not actually in the village, you won't see it by walking around Bintree. So now we're going to drive into the village and see what's there.
These 3 houses sit where the Bintree and Twyford Village Hall used to be. When it was here, it was a shared space for both villages, run under a declaration of trust set up in 1967. It sat beside a playing fields that were used for bowls, football, and other outdoor gatherings. Before the hall existed, the site had already seen plenty of use. It was once the location of a small school, serving the village long before the idea of a shared hall came along. When the school closed, the land was reused for the new building. The hall was run by the Bintree and Twyford Village Hall and Playing Field Association, which looked after it and the land around it. It handled a lot of village life over the years and was even used as the local polling station. The cost of repairs made it hard to keep the building open. Safety concerns even forced a temporary closure once. The committee tried to keep it running, but the work needed was too much. Eventually, the decision was made to close it for good. The building stood empty for a while, until it was finally demolished, and these 3 houses were built in its place. Even though the hall is gone, people still remember how much happened here. So they should, given it served the 2 villages for decades.
So in that last shot there, you can see how this road that runs through Bintree has cut it into 2 pieces now. The old road is what we're going to be following next. We're passing this green and we're heading towards the Royal Oak pub.
The Royal Oak is a 17th century pub that has been through a lot. Today, it looks rather fresh after a big rebuild. It sat closed for more than 3 years after the COVID lockdowns, and the place needed serious work before it could reopen. It got it, thanks to J. Wilkinson and his family. They spent 2 full years fixing every part of it. The building itself is old, solid, and full of character, with beams, a single bar, and a flagstone floor. The Wilkinsons kept the old look, but made it stronger and safer, because above all they wanted to save the pub from being turned into housing. An outside terrace was added so people can sit out, eat, drink, and enjoy live entertainment. A camping area was set up too, with space for 5 caravans, which added a new twist to the site. The whole project took patience, planning, and a lot of hands-on effort from the family. It was a little easier for J. Wilkinson than it may have been for any other prospective landlord, because he'd worked in construction before until a back injury forced him to stop. Instead of stepping away from work entirely, he took on the Royal Oak as a new challenge. He did a good job, didn't he? The Royal Oak is still the same 17th century pub at its core, but now it has new energy, new owners, and new plans. After years of silence, the doors are open again, and the place feels ready for a busy future.
Okay, so after the Royal Oak, you have Mill Road on the right-hand side, which we're going to follow for a short distance here before we make a loop around Bintree to come back up towards the Royal Oak later. Now down here, it's mainly all residential, and of course it leads to the mill, which we've already seen, but that's a long, long way away. The next thing to see on the right-hand side down here is a former Methodist chapel. Let's check that out next. This is a former primitive Methodist chapel on Mill Road, which first opened its doors in 1877. When the Methodist Union took place in 1932, bringing together the primitive, Wesleyan and United Methodist branches, this chapel became part of the new single Methodist church. Through the decades, the chapel kept going with the same simple layout and the same straightforward purpose. It was never a large building, but it was well known. People gathered here for services, meetings and special occasions for 124 years. The chapel finally closed in 2001. Attendance had dropped and the building was no longer needed for regular services. Now converted into a private home, the outside still looks like the chapel people remember. We're about to come to the church now, but just before we do, on the right hand side there's a small playing field. This has a playground in one of the corners, which is quite big actually, a decent old size for a village like this. You can tell it's been warm recently because this is a playing field and it's supposed to be green, isn't it? Well, the grass looks all yellow and horrible at the moment, doesn't it? I'm sure with a bit of rain it'll come back to life, no problem. Now our next landmark you've just seen in the last shot, it's Bintree's church, which stands overlooking this playing field. Let's go and check this out next.
This is a church that's been rebuilt, repaired, patched and improved across its long life. It's one of 4 in Norfolk to be dedicated to St Swithin, and as such, a statue of him watches over Bintree from the porch. Victorian work made a big impact here, with major restorations in the 1830s, 1870s and 1880s, but the basic structure is mostly 14th century perpendicular. The tower dates to the early 14th century and has simple Y tracery that suits the age of the place. One of the most unusual parts of the church's past involves Father Richard Enrath, who was rector from 1895 to 1898. He was the last Church of England priest ever imprisoned under the Public Worship Regulation Act. His crime was adding a Roman-style ritual to his services. The public were outraged and the law was scrapped soon afterwards. Enraat later returned to parish life. He died in 1898 and is buried at the eastern end of the church, where his grave is still marked. The church also holds a memorial for Ralph Outlaw, rector in the 1600s. Inside the church, older features sit beside some later additions. The Norman pillar piscina is a rare survival, and the octagonal font from the 14th century stands near the entrance. Victorian stained glass fills several windows, with work by William Wales, Alexander Gibbs, and Horace Wilkinson.
So if you walk to the other end of the road that the church is on, you're then faced with this. This is the entrance to the manor house, a massive, great big building that's kind of hidden away behind walls and trees. Can't really see much of it. And to be fair, I didn't find much about it anyway, so it's there, but I don't really have a lot to tell you about it. Instead, we're going to make our way back up the main street now, back towards the Royal Oak. We're going to go beyond that pub, and we're going to go and find a former pub to finish. So this was one of the pubs to Bintree's name. It was called the Half Moon. At number 2 The Street, this was already up and running by 1794 with Robert Stringer behind the bar. It worked as a small alehouse in those days. Later records show that the Half Moon was tied to the Deerham Brewery, which owned the freehold and the land around it. In 1890, the brewery's books noted that the site came with 3 acres, which is a decent chunk for a village pub. After it closed in 1929, the building didn't vanish or fall apart. Instead, it slowly turned into private homes, with the old pub space divided into separate parts. Some sections became flats or annexes, and the name Late Half Moon stuck around on the address at number 2 The Street. Okay, so we're on the central reservation here in the middle of the road, which runs through Bintree. We'll be heading down this to the next village very shortly. Before we leave Bintree behind though, there is one thing left that we definitely do need to talk about, and that would be the old Watts Naval School, which was just inside Bintree's boundaries. This is for Amelia.
In the west of the boundaries of Bintree, there was once a big school. Originally called Norfolk County School, it opened in 1874 after the foundation stone was laid by the then Prince of Wales the year before. It was built for the sons of farmers and even had an open-air swimming pool. That's not all it had. The site had a central building, a principal's house, a laundry, a gardener's cottage, a boathouse, and a cricket ground. The river marked the western edge, and the school used it for swimming and boating, which sounds fun until you remember the water was probably icy cold. A chapel was added in 1883 and a railway station opened in 1884 to help boys reach the school more easily. Even with all of that, the school never hit its planned roll of 300, and so it closed in 1895. However, in 1901, the site was bought by Edmund Hannay Watts. His son renovated the whole place and handed it to Dr. Barnardo's, turning it into a home for up to 300 boys who were trained for life at sea. It opened in 1903 under the name Watts Naval School. Life at the school then ran on tight timings. Boys woke at 6:30 a.m, had prayers, breakfast, drills, lessons, more drills, tea, and then bed after evening prayers. The building, though, barely changed from its earlier school days, but it did gain a glass-roofed hall and an acetylene gas supply at least. Dorms, classrooms, dining rooms and staff rooms filled the upper floors, while the basement held boilers, offices and bathrooms. There was even an isolation hospital in the grounds for when illness struck. Watts Naval School did slightly better than its predecessor, lasting until 1953. After closure, the boys were moved to other Barnardo's training sites. Most of the main building was later demolished, and the land became a poultry farm before new houses were built there. However, the chapel survived and is now a private home, but its stained glass windows were sold off in 1978.
Walking through Bintree feels like stepping through a pocket-sized slice of Norfolk history. Starting with the Wensum curling past the old watermill, that's a 4-storey red brick giant that's been here since the 1750s. As you head into the village, the Royal Oak appears, fresh from its huge rebuild after years of closure, with its beams, its flagstones, its terrace and its camping pitches all brought back to life by the Wilkinson family. St Swithin's is another standout, with its grave of Father Richard Enrott at the eastern end, the last priest ever jailed under the Public Worship Regulation Act. Bintree may be small, but it packs a lot into a short walk, and every stop has a tale to tell.
Water turning through semi-forgotten plains by the Wensum where the old mill stands. Stone and timber on the rising hill, St Swithin's tower watching so grand. Names in records that refuse to fade, marking every path the old folk made. Mill pond mist on a silver night glows like something just out of sight. When some water take the day, carry every tale along your way. Every track and every bend feels like walking with an old friend. Farmers worked through frost and rain, finding calm along the river shore, turning soil again and again, and Cowper walked those tracks before. Names in records that refuse to fade, marking every path the old folk made. Mill pond mist on a silver night glows like something just out of sight. When some water take the day, carry every tale along your way. Every track and every bend feels like walking with an old friend. Mill wheel silent, river strong, pulling every thought along. Old tales drifting across the ground, waiting there to be refound. So we walk where the Wensum glides, letting time slip with the tides. Bintree fields beneath our feet in rural Norfolk, where past and present meet. with an old friend.
Hello folks, welcome back to Breckland once again for episode number 2. Now, I'm standing here next to what used to be a busy, bustling Roman town. Not that you'd know these days, because this is all you can see of it these days. There's some hedges, there's a bit of grass, there's a road, but there's no town. It's because it's all sort of in these fields, and also within an area that's now covered by some lakes. And this is all linked together because when these lakes were formed, they discovered there was a Roman settlement here once upon a time. You can find it all in Billingford. Billingford, Ford of the Billingers. Today in Breckland, we're in Billingford, which sits between Dereham and Fakenham, just off the A1067 with the River Wensum looping around its edges. Gravel pits, Roman remains, old halls, chapels, pubs and a standout church all sit within a short stroll here. The name Billingford goes right back to Old English. It likely means the Ford of the Billingers, which points to a group or a family who once lived near a crossing point on the Wensum. It's worth noting there are 2 Billingfords in Norfolk, the other one is near Diss. This one's past can be traced back to a busy Roman roadside settlement, then through medieval farms, manors and mills. The Roman site, south of the modern road, was lived in from the 1st century AD until around 750, with coins, pottery and dress items all found in huge numbers. The landmark that defines Billingford best today would be the fishing lakes and the country park. Once a strip of gravel pits, the land filled with water and became a huge 150-acre site of lakes, ponds and riverbanks. It has over 100 pegs, 11 lakes and features a vast stretch of the Wensum. Billingford Hall stands on the western edge too, an 18th century Grade 2 listed house with a U-shaped plan and a listed ice house in its grounds. St Peter's Church sits on a rise to the north, famous for its rare octagonal tower. Billingford doesn't have any wild legends, but it does have tales. Metal detectorists talk about something called the Lucky Strip here. That's a patch near the Roman town where coins seem to appear more often than anywhere else. The most notable figure linked to Billingford is Horatio Walpole of Beck Hall. Born in 1663, he served in the army, married into the Coke family of Holcombe and later sat in Parliament as a Tory MP. He was the uncle of Sir Robert Walpole, Britain's first de facto Prime Minister. His time at Beck Hall was colourful, marked by money troubles, political frustration and a famous tale of getting his stepson drunk to secure a lease. Billingford today is quiet, but not without things going on. The fishing lakes continue to expand with new facilities year on year. Elsewhere, the village hall still runs events from quizzes to sales. Traffic on the A1067 is a talking point, especially at busy times. Beyond that, Billingford ticks along at its own pace with small changes rather than big dramas. Gravel extraction was the major employer, reshaping the land west of the village. Today, the fishing lakes and the country park provide seasonal jobs, along with small local businesses and farming that still continue around the village. Let's go and have a look.
Hiya folks, here's what I'm going to be on here in Billingford. I've got the church to cover, the fishing lakes to tell you about, plus I'll also have a bit of information about Horatio Walpole of Beck Hall. So here, to begin with, we have a strip of land west of Billingford, just off the A1067, that was once used for gravel digging. The pits that were left behind after those industrial days were filled with water to create Billingford fishing lakes and country park. The River Wensum runs through the site for about a mile, and it moves fast with plenty of life in it. Some people stick to the lakes, while others head straight for the river. The whole place covers 150 acres and holds 11 lakes and ponds. One of these lakes is named after John Wilson, a well-known angler who spent time here. In 2023, a lakeside cafe opened, and the site now has camping, caravan pitches, and a play area. Part of the site is protected because of some old Roman activity. We'll cover that more in a moment. People come here because it feels calm and relaxed, and it's a good place to switch off for a bit. There are over 100 pegs on these lakes, which all come in different shapes and sizes, and each one has shallow edges before dropping to between 8 to 12 feet. Roach, perch, eels, pike, tench, and bream are spread across the lakes. The first lake is packed with carp, with fish in there which weigh between 10 and 25 pounds. A 40-pound mirror carp was landed in June 2016, which still gets talked about among anglers.
Okay, so we've come a couple of 100 yards away from the entrance to the lakes there, and I'm standing on the end of a public footpath. It's the same one you saw in the intro of this video, and this is where I'm going to tell you a bit about the Roman town. Now, although you can't see much of the Roman town because, as we've already seen, it's all hedges and trees and fields and whatnot, it is here. It is here, trust me. It's kind of in this area, and the lakes cover part of the town as well. There was also a bit to the north of this road as well. It was quite a busy place. Let's have a bit of a discussion about it. So here we have the site of a former Roman roadside settlement between the old gravel pits and Billingford Hall. It lies to the south of the Billingford to North Elmham Road and east of the River Wensum. This was a busy civilian place lived in from the early 1st century AD until around 750 AD. It's close to the line of a Roman road that once ran between Brampton and Denver. Parallel ditches follow the line of that road, heading west towards a crossing over the Wensum. This, for sure, is a place where ancient finds have been plentiful. Most of them have clustered to the north and south of the modern road. Coins dominate the finds, with around 1,500 recorded over the years, along with dress items and personal bits and pieces. Pottery has mostly been local greyware from the Brampton kilns, with some finer pieces mixed in. On the western fringes of the village now, very close to the Roman town, we have Billingford Hall. This, a former manor house, was built in the 18th century and has been Grade 2 listed since 1984. Within the grounds of the hall is an ice house, which was also Grade 2 listed in the same year. Built in lime-washed brick with pantile roofs, it has a U-shaped plan with tall wings at the back and later infill between them. The front has 5 bays of sash windows under skew-back arches. The centre sticks out a little, with narrow blocked windows on each side. A shallow porch was added in the late 18th century with a 2-leaf door, a fanlight and a neat pediment. 3 dormers sit on the roof. The gables have tumbling-in brickwork, and there are stacks on the wings and on the main block. There are some small outhouses at the back too. Okay, so from one end of the village to the other, we're now going to go across to the east of Billingford and start our main walk there. Everything you've seen so far has been away to the west and kind of a bit far-flung. It's time to get moving on our feet. Okay, so here's the other end of the village then. I've parked on Festival Road, which is a little cul-de-sac down there. And as you can see, Billingford doesn't really go much further than that. If you're heading to the east, we'll be seeing what's down there at the end, but it's not much. So we're heading back to the west then, and we'll walk around the village from this point onwards. The first thing to see is on the left-hand side, it's an old Methodist chapel. Now, Billingford used to have at least 3 of those. So now it's time for a walk. Billingford once had 3 separate primitive Methodist chapels, each taking its turn as the main place for local worship. The first one arrived in 1841, but by 1864 it was worn out, so a new one went up to replace it. In 1908, a third chapel opened on the street, bigger, smarter and built to last. It became the main spot for worship over 60 years. In 1970 though, things had slowed down and the chapel closed its doors for the last time. This house on the street used to be a pub. It was called the Bell when it closed, but it was once known as the Blue Bell. It worked as a coaching inn for a long stretch of time, sitting on the main route between Dereham and the nearby villages. The earliest firm record of the inn comes from a newspaper advert in the Stamford Mercury in February 1724. It was listed for sale with some stables, a barn and corn chambers. It handled goods, animals and people passing through. The Bell carried on trading well into the 20th century. The biggest moment in Billingford's educational history came in 1844 when a national school was put up by subscription right here. I didn't find out a lot about this one, but of course this school was part of that huge push across the country to get basic teaching into rural areas. Standard stuff. Billingford Village Hall next. This was set up under a formal declaration of trust in May 1961. It was created to give locals a place to meet, talk and run events. The idea was simple, a hall that anyone could use no matter their background or views. It was built to be flexible and it stayed that way for decades. Saturday auctions brought people in early. Quiz nights later filled the tables, rounders games often spilled out onto the playing fields and tabletop sales packed the room with stalls. This hall remains a key part of village life now. Not far up the street we have what used to be a forge, hence why there's a nameplate on its wall saying The Forge. However, this was also once a pub. It was converted into one from the village forge in 1981. It closed in the early 2000s and it's now a dwelling. Okay, we've made it to the church, which is up a small rise. We've just walked up from the forge there and we've got to the top of it, and this is the beautiful building you see when you make that journey, I suppose. Amelia, this is all yours.
St Peter's Church is on a rise above the lane to Bintree. Most of it was built in the 1300s. The tower here is completely octagonal, which is rare in Norfolk. In fact, the county only has 3 fully octagonal towers across its 500 and odd parishes. This church has been Grade 1 listed since 1960. A small 19th century schoolhouse stands in the churchyard, and that is Grade 2 listed. As you approach from the east, you'll notice the big east window almost touches the road. It's a Victorian replacement, but still catches the eye. The ground drops away as you walk towards the tower, so you end up several metres below the road. The churchyard is uneven, with headstones scattered in all directions. Some graves tell tough tales, including 2 brothers killed in the First World War and a man lost in the Boer War. Inside, the church feels open and spacious. Tall Victorian benches fill the centre with no main aisle, which gives the place a different feel from most churches. The floor slopes towards the east, adding to the unusual layout. The octagonal font is a standout piece, likely predating the current church. Another highlight is the early 16th century eagle lectern, made of Latin. It stands on an orb and is one of about 10 in Norfolk. Unlike others, the one here has never been polished, so it has a darker, older look. In all, St Peter's remains one of the most distinctive churches in the Deer Ram area.
Okay, so to get back to the start here, we're crossing the playing field, and to do that we're using a public footpath which is opposite the church, and it comes out close to the Methodist chapel that you saw at the beginning of this walk. It's been a nice circuit, that, of Billingford. Very quiet place, not many people around. There's been the odd body here and there, but most of the sort of human activity I've seen in this place has been on the road. So yeah, quite a peaceful little place, this. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it attracted some famous names in its time. Let's finish this episode off. When we get to the car, we'll be heading to the east a bit more, and Amelia will tell you a bit about Beck Hall.
To the east of Billingford, off the road to Foxley, there's another big house we should mention. This is Beck Hall, which began life in the 1200s as a medieval hospice for 13 poor travellers heading to Walsingham. It sat on a moated site and was set up by William de Beck during the reign of Henry III. Through the Middle Ages, the site passed through the Curson family, who held it for generations. After the dissolution in the 1500s, the land went to Sir John Perrot. Later, it became part of the Holcombe Hall estate and was used as a farmhouse. The old hospice buildings then faded away. By the late 18th century, a new house was built on the same moated ground. That building is the Beck Hall we see today. It's a Grade 2 listed property and remains one of the key historic spots in Billingford, and not just because of what it stands on. This was once lived in by someone famous. The man in question was Horatio Walpole, who called this home in the 17th and early 18th century. He was born in 1663 and was the son of Sir Edward Walpole of Houghton. He served in the army, first as a cornet and later as a captain. He left the army in 1691 to marry Lady Anne Coke of Holkham. Through that marriage, he gained a lease on Beck Hall, helped along by a tale of getting his stepson drunk to secure the deal. That's rather underhanded, but then again, he did become a politician not long afterwards. He sat in Parliament from 1702 to 1710 as a Tory. He rarely spoke and was seen as ineffective, which somewhat annoyed the man considered to be Great Britain's first Prime Minister, his own nephew, Sir Robert Walpole. Money troubles followed him, made worse by his wife's spending and rising rent at Beck Hall. He later gained a post in Ireland and held it until 1716, but he died in 1717 at Broomthorpe, leaving his estate to another nephew, Galfridus Walpole.
So just to let you know, at the fork you saw there as I drove up this horrible concrete road, by the way, Beck Hall is the one to the right. The one to the left at that gateway, that takes you to Beck Hall Barns. Couldn't go much further than that because going beyond those gates would have been straying onto private property, so I turned around and I'm heading back to the road. Walking around Billingford was an absolute delight. We started out by the fishing lakes, where old gravel pits have turned into a huge spread of water, reeds and riverbends. From there we cut across towards the Roman site, standing on ground that once held a busy roadside settlement. A little further on we found the old Methodist chapel on Hull Lane, now a house but still easy to spot provided you know what you're looking for. Then came the Bell on the street, once a coaching inn, now a run of homes. We finished up at St Peter's with that rare octagonal tower. The short hop to Beck Hall completed it all, once a medieval hospice and later home to Horatio Walpole. Yes, in all, Billingford might be small, but walking it feels like flicking through a whole book of Norfolk history in one go.
By the Winsome, where the fields run long, there's a mill that stands with its sails once strong. Brick tower watching every dawn roll through. It was work that so many locals knew. And this feels like a place that knows how to keep its pace, where the river moves slow in its own old space, where the old mill stands tall on the open ground, complemented by the countryside, sights all around. When some mist rolling low and thin, both tales start when the dusk moves in. Footsteps heard on a storm-hit night. The miller swears he saw shapes in the fading light. And this feels like a place that knows how to keep its pace, where the river moves slow in its own old space, where the old mill stands tall on the open ground, complemented by the countryside, sights all around. Fields worked hard by the hands long gone, plows once cut while the sun shone on. Billingford, this little village with a lot of pride, sitting between the Norfolk fields so wide. And this feels like a place that knows how to keep its pace, where the river moves slow in its own old space, where the old mill stands complemented by the countryside, sights all around. Billingford, hey, Billingford. Ooh, Billingford, hey, Billingford. Hey, da-da-dum-bum-bum, where the old mill stands tall on the open ground, complemented by the countryside, sights all around.
Hello folks, welcome back to Breckland in Norfolk. Now, in this particular episode, we're going to be seeing a lovely village, which has got usual villagey type stuff. Some very narrow lanes, by the way. The one I'm standing on here is extremely narrow. I've done very well to park my car on this one, out of anybody's way. But it's not the village that puts this one on the map. It does have some fantastic bits to it, and we will discuss them. But it's what's to the north of this village that people really know it for. It's a wood. Not just any old wood, it's the biggest wood in Norfolk. Welcome to Foxley. Foxley, Fox Clearing. Next up in Breckland, we're in Foxley, just north of the A1067 and about halfway between Norwich and Fakenham. In this one you get old farms, ancient woodland, a medieval church and a road that sliced the village into two in the 1990s. The name Foxley comes from the Old English Foxley, meaning a clearing linked with foxes. It fits the place well, especially with Foxley Wood sitting just to the north. The woodland has been here for thousands of years. The 20th century brought big changes here, especially when the A1067 bypass cut through the village, but Foxley Wood has endured it all. At over 6,000 years old, it even appears in the Domesday Book, proving the area was important long before the village took shape. Foxley Wood is the biggest ancient woodland in Norfolk and covers around 300 acres. It was once heavily worked for hazel, timber and bark. After years of damage, the Norfolk Wildlife Trust stepped in and restored it. Now it's a national nature reserve full of bluebells and butterflies. Foxley has a surprising list of other landmarks. The moated site behind Old Hall Farmhouse hints at a medieval manor linked to the Bigod family. St Thomas's Church stands on a rise with Saxon stonework, a 14th century font and a famous 15th century rood screen. Foxley has a few tales worth repeating too. The best known is the 1762 wager, when a weaver set off from the site of the Hare and Hounds, walked to Norwich and back in just over 5.5 hours and danced hornpipes along the way. He must have been mad. Foxley's most notable modern link is with Dick Joyce, the former presenter of Anglia Television's Bygones. His wife, Margaret Joyce, bought the former Chequers Inn after it closed in the late 1960s, turning it into their home. Ongoing issues are a little less famous. Recent years have focused on woodland care and village access. Foxley Wood continues to receive conservation work, including grants to improve paths and the car park. The return of the purple emperor butterfly in particular has been a major success there. Historically, Foxley relied on farming and trades linked to its inns. The Hare and Hounds once had a blacksmith shop and a wheelwright on site, for example. Today, employment is more spread out, with residents travelling to nearby towns, though farming still plays a role. Put all of this together and you get the lovely Foxley. As you walk around it, you get the sense there's loads to discover at every turn. From the moated field to the bluebell paths, from the church porch to the old inns, Foxley rewards anyone who takes the time to see it.
Hello everybody, this is what I'm offering for you today. Foxley's biggest landmark is easily the incredible wood out to the east, and I know you're going to enjoy that. It's the sort of place I loved as a kid.
Okay, so we've driven to our start point, parked the car on this very narrow road. I am out of the way of people, which is a good thing. And we're off for a little stroll around the village before we go up to Foxley Wood to finish this one off. Behind me, there's a very big house. That's our start point. It's Old Hall Farmhouse. First up here in Foxley is a landmark we can't see. This property here is called Old Hall Farmhouse, and it's a name that's a direct reference to what sits in the open countryside behind it. Look on any modern overhead map and you'll see clearly a moated site. The old moat at Foxley sits in a field that's seen a lot of action over time. People think it might be the spot linked to a Bigod manor mentioned in 1305, which is a pretty cool thought. The place has a long ditch on each side and the eastern ditch still holds water. You know, I've been doing this for 6 years and it's not as if I haven't learned anything over those 6 years. I was approaching this house you can see behind me and I instantly thought to myself, that's an old shop, isn't it? And I'm absolutely right, because at this corner here, behind this, it says Old Stores Cottage. I'm getting good, aren't I? Now, dead opposite this, there's the church, behind these hedges. There it is.
St Thomas's Church sits on a rise above the street, not far from the centre of the village, and looks older than almost anything around it. The place began in Saxon or early Norman times, and you can still spot rough old stonework in the nave's walls. Later, builders added a chancel in the 1200s and a tower in the 1300s. The porch came in the 1400s. This church is often locked, but the outside can tell you a lot. The tower has a chunky stair turret, while the porch door is about 700 years old and still looks the part. The chancel has patches where old render has fallen away, leaving raw stone. Odd bits of brick at the top suggest later tweaks. It all feels patched together, but in a good way. Should you get inside, the church is famous for keeping its old fittings. The nave has a low ceiling and a west gallery, whilst a chunky 14th century font sits under the gallery like it was dropped there and never moved. The benches and box pews date from the 1600s, and the double-decker pulpit is from the same era. It's the rood screen that's the star here, though. It was put in place in around 1472 and carries painted panels of the 4 Latin doctors. They are St Ambrose, St Gregory, St Jerome, and St Augustine, and they all stand there in bright colours. The top of the screen was cut down during the wild days of Edward VI, then fixed again soon after. The churchyard has its own surprises. There's a fossil tree that sits in the southwest corner, and a 17th century market cross shaft standing by the entrance.
Okay, so just after the church there's a junction and we're standing on the end of a road called Chapel Road East. There is a Chapel Road West as well, and the reason that there is an east and west split here is because there's a road that runs straight through the middle of the two. It's split Foxley into 2 bits. We'll talk a bit about that road in a moment, but first of all we have to walk down Chapel Road East and actually see what's on it. There's the village hall for a start. Let's make for that. Foxley Village Hall sits on Chapel Road and has been part of village life since 1952. That's when the land it sits on was conveyed. The hall later became a registered charity in May 1963. Ever since, it's always relied on local effort to keep it going. As the hall aged, its upkeep was a bit of an issue. By the early 2000s, it needed more than just a quick fix. Plans were drawn up for a full rebuild, and support for that came from Breckland Council. Before work could start though, ecological checks were carried out to protect bats living nearby. Once everything was approved, the old hall came down. A brand new building rose in its place, opening proudly in April 2015. This new hall feels fresh and practical. The car park was resurfaced too, and a patio area was added outside. Life around the hall remained steady and friendly. Foxley once had two primitive Methodist chapels standing along Chapel Road. The first opened in 1862 and served local farm workers and families for more than 30 years. It was a simple building but busy and well used. As time went on, the group grew too big for that space. By 1898, a new chapel was ready, offering more room and better facilities. It carried on well into the 20th century, seeing plenty of village activity. Slowly, the Foxley Chapel saw fewer visitors though, especially after the Methodist unification of 1932. Eventually, the doors closed for good. The building stood empty for a while, but it was eventually turned into a home. It gained an open-plan kitchen, bright rooms and 3 bedrooms. In August 2015, this was on the market for £220,000. That's a snip, if you ask me. Okay, so we've hit the bypass, which we'll talk about in a moment. Here's a bus stop which you can use on this road. I've already seen a couple of these buses this morning actually, 28s, 29s and X29s. They all go into Norwich, and if you go the other way, they take you to Fakenham. There's the route there, and you can see Foxley on there, I think. No, I can't see Foxley on there. It's not on there. Bawdeswell is, which is the next village down. So we're very near the end of the Fakenham end of the route here. And they're quite frequent too. Here's the times underneath. Very, very good service into Norwich from here.
Foxley, as a village, looks very different from the one that was on those old maps at the start. The main reason is because of the road layout. This is the A1067, one of the main roads heading out of Norwich, which starts in a slightly confusing way. Signs do not always agree on where it begins, and some even make it look like it starts closer to the city centre than it really does. Once it gets going, it heads northwest along Drayton Road, and it feels like it takes ages before you finally reach the open countryside. After leaving the suburbs behind, it drops into the floodplain of the River Wensum before eventually hitting Foxley. This stretch of the road completely changed the village when it was built in the 1990s. In fact, it was rather dramatic. The old dogleg route through the village was bypassed thanks to this, with the new road cutting straight through it, splitting Foxley into 2 halves.
Tell you what, I can guarantee you that Foxley was never that noisy before this road came along. Okay, we've crossed over, we're on the other side, we're in Foxley West now, and let's see if this is as good as the East.
On the western side of the A1067, there's only really one landmark of note, and that would be this house. This is an old pub which used to be called the Hare and Hounds, although it began life under a different name. In the late 1700s, it was known as the Dog. We have a tale to tell from those times. In 1762, a story goes that a weaver set off from the site of this pub, walked to Norwich and back in just over 5.5 hours, and danced hornpipes along the way. This was not even a pub yet, but thanks to that tale, it was already a place people talked about. In 1797, the building appeared on Faden's map as the Dog, marking it firmly on the local scene. In 1819, it was first recorded as the Hare and Hounds when it went up for sale. That sale notice is the earliest written proof of the new name. From then on, it became a proper village inn. During the 1800s, the Hare and Hounds was far more than a pub. It had a tap room, a club room, 4 bedrooms, and even a cottage. It also had a blacksmith shop and a wheelwright's shop on the same plot. The inn was run by a string of tradesmen publicans. One of the best known was William Howe, a master blacksmith who ran the place in the mid-1870s. The pub was tied to different breweries over the years, each one leaving its mark. But like many rural pubs, it eventually saw fewer customers. It's now a private home.
Now I'm tipping this will be the quietest part of the walk now, because we're at the furthest point away from the main road, the bypass, and this lane basically has nothing on it. There's a couple of houses, one big one there and a couple here, but aside from these there's nothing for a short distance. What this road does is it goes back to the main road, we'll cross it again, and then we'll be heading back into Foxley east again. There's only one more thing to catch on this route, and that's another old pub called the Checkers. I think this particular section between here and there is good enough for some ASMR.
So if you don't count the church, the former Checkers Inn in Foxley is often said to be the oldest building in the village. From the outside, it looks late 18th century, but the inside tells a different tale. Carpenter's marks and an inscribed date point straight to 1624. Life at the Checkers in the 19th century was lively. Records from the mid-1800s paint a picture of a busy alehouse with regular drinkers and plenty of local gossip. One tale from 1850 involves a stolen silk handkerchief that turned up at the Bawdeswell Ram after a drinking session at the Checkers. The pub kept going through the early and mid-20th century, but times changed. By the late 1960s, breweries were selling off smaller tied houses, and the Checkers was one of them. Trade had slowed, and the building was no longer needed as a pub. After closing, the Checkers was bought by Margaret Joyce, the wife of Dick Joyce, who was the well-known presenter of Anglia Television's Bygone series. Under their ownership, the building was converted into a private home. For sure, the Checkers sat in a busy little corner of Foxley. A mink farm once stood behind it, and Church Farm sat directly across the road. It would have been a lively spot, with people passing by, farm work going on, and the pub acting as a landmark.
So there we go, folks, nice simple walk around Foxley. All I've got to do from this point onwards is go back past the church, which you can see just there, and up to the car. And then of course we'll be heading up to Foxley Wood. It's the only thing left to cover. Okay, so it's about half a mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile up the road from Foxley Village, and you find yourself here in Foxley Wood. Now, this is the absolute gem of this village. You can't talk about Foxley without talking about this, so let's.
Wrapping us up today, we have Foxley Wood, just to the north of the village. This is big. In fact, this is the biggest ancient woodland in Norfolk. Parts of it are over 6,000 years old, and it even appears in the Domesday Book. For 1,000 years, it supplied wood for all sorts of jobs, from hazel cutting to bark for tanning. When demand dropped in the 20th century, the place became worn out and overworked. Roads, ditches, and heavy spraying damaged the ground badly. By the 1980s, the wood was in trouble. Trees had been cut too hard, conifers had been planted in the wrong places, and the undergrowth was fading fast. In 1988, the Norfolk Wildlife Trust stepped in and began bringing the place back to life. They used coppicing only where it helped rare plants like primrose and cowslip. Over the next 30 years, the wood slowly recovered, and birdsong returned to the paths and rides. Today, Foxley Wood is a national nature reserve and a site of special scientific interest, protecting all 300 acres of it. It's packed with plants, insects, and birds. Bluebells carpet the ground in spring and are one of the biggest draws for visitors. Woodpeckers and owls are regular sights, and the return of the purple emperor butterfly has been a huge win for the site too. Studies in the early 2000s even found Foxley to be the best place in the UK for new tree growth, which says a lot about how well the wood has bounced back. Work continues today. The Norfolk Wildlife Trust hopes to link Foxley Wood to other ancient woods through green corridors. The wood has a long link with the village. The rerouting of the Norwich to Fakenham Road in the 1990s left a quiet lane leading straight from St Thomas's Church to the woodland's edge. Old notes from 1879 recorded plants that have since been rediscovered in the exact same spots.
Beautiful place is Foxley Wood, and if you want to come and visit it, there are 3 car parks. There is a one-way system. That car that's just come past me is going the wrong way. You're supposed to come the other way along this road. These 3 car parks are out off this little track. So I'll go out the right way and we'll drive on to the next one. Visiting Foxley is a delight. Although you cannot see it from the road, knowing about the moated site is a great place to begin here. It adds a bit of mystery to the place. From there you're onto the church and the new Norwich Road that sliced the village in half in the 1990s. It's hard to picture the old dogleg route now because the bypass changed everything. Looping past the old pubs is also a rewarding amble. The Hare and Hounds, once the dog, still stands as a house, and the Chequers sits further along with its 1624 frame hidden behind later brickwork. Then the lane drifts out towards the woodland edge where the bluebells spread in spring and the paths run straight under the trees. Knowing parts of that wood are over 6,000 years old gives this whole episode a bit of weight. What a fabulous Norfolk village.
Foxley sits by the B 1145, tucked between fields and trees. Proudly stands its church tower, tall under the breeze. Foxley Wood is there too, deep with orchids and shade. Its history hangs around, marking how the place was made. Give me an F, an O, an X, L-E-Y, and you'll get a village you can't pass by. Walk on through the wood where the bluebells crowd the ground and the air feels warm and sweet. Step past farms and hedged-off fields where there's beauty all around, and love the ground beneath your feet. Old tales drift round the trees, lantern lights in the night. Poachers ran through the dark, chasing pride more than sight. Farmhands work the soil, timber crews cut the wood. Now folks drive out for work, though Foxley still feels real good. Give me an F, an O, an X, L-E-Y, and you'll get a village you can't pass by. Walk on through the wood where the bluebells crowd the ground and the air feels warm and sweet. Step past farms and hedged off fields where there's beauty all around, and love the ground beneath your feet. Naturalists came to note orchids, beetles and more. Bloomfield Road is peace, marking what came before. Volunteers keep watch now, tending paths through the green, but Foxley stays on the modern map, bold, calm and keen. Hear the crunch of the path, feel the pull of the trees. Be it old work or new work, it's all carried on the breeze. Foxley, oh Foxley, steady under the sky. You'll love it, walk it, and you'll know why. Walk on through the wood where the bluebells crowd the ground and the air feels warm and sweet. Step past farms and hedged off fields where there's beauty all around, and love the ground beneath your feet. Give me an F, an O, an X, L-E-Y, and you'll get a village you can't pass by. So take that turn by the wood, let the day run slow. Foxley waits in the open, ready for you to go. So take that turn by the wood, let the day run slow. Foxley is incredible, more than you'll ever know.
Hello folks, welcome back to Breckland in Norfolk once again. Now we're a long way from Kent here, and therefore we're a long way from Canterbury, but this village has got a connection to the Canterbury Tales, written of course by Geoffrey Chaucer. We're going to find out what that link is as we journey around this. There's even a house here that's called Chaucer House, which is named after him of course. This is Bawdeswell. Bawdeswell. Today in Breckland, we're in Bawdeswell, right on the A1067 between Norwich and Fakenham. This is the biggest place we'll be covering this week, and it's absolutely loaded with tales. And keep the word tales in mind, it's rather important here. The name Bawdeswell goes back to medieval times. It appears in Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales as Bawdeswell, and scholars think it comes from an Old English personal name combined with weller, meaning a spring or a stream. Bawdeswell's early life sits in the same landscape that once held a huge open heath stretching from Billingford to Reepham. That changed in 1808 when enclosure carved it up and it shrank the heath dramatically. As for the village, well, that grew steadily, gaining chapels, a school and a church. The landmark that defines Bawdeswell best today is the garden centre. It began as Bennett's Nurseries but changed completely when Peter and Judy Underwood bought it in 1983. They expanded it into a full destination with a restaurant, a food hall and big retail areas. There's plenty more to spot. The village hall and the playing field sit up in the northern part of the village, built through grants and local effort, with a licensed bar and room for activities. All Saints Church stands nearby, rebuilt in the 1950s after a wartime crash destroyed its predecessor. Bawdeswell's best known tale comes straight from Chaucer. The reeve in the Canterbury tales is said to come from Bawdeswell, and his tale is a sharp, chaotic cradle trick story full of tricks, confusion, and revenge. Geoffrey Chaucer never lived here, but his writing definitely put Bawdeswell on the map. The reeve's Norfolk roots gave the village a place in English literature, and the later owners of Chaucer House leaned into that link. Speaking of local property owners, the Gurney family, famously tied to Barclays Bank, also left their mark after buying Bawdeswell Hall in 1912. Their connection includes a portrait of Elizabeth Fry hanging inside the hall. Right now, the biggest issue is the future of the village shop, which is a Morrison's Daily. Morrison's has listed around 100 branches for closure, and the Bawdeswell shop is on the at-risk list, which has caused concern locally. It's a key service, and people are waiting to see what happens. Work in Bawdeswell has changed over time. Farming dominated for centuries, helped by the open heath and nearby estates like Bylaw Hall. Today, the garden centre is the biggest employer, but the Hawkey kitchen also adds another modern workplace. Let's have a look at it all, shall we?
Amelia's Features.
Hello everyone, this is what I've got for you in Bawdeswell. This is a village that has so much to talk about. I could have narrated the whole episode here. I had to give Andy something to do though.
So you just saw me turn around there in the car park of the garden centre. The garden centre will be the last thing we touch on this walk. We've got quite a bit of plodding to do before we get back to this point in a moment. I could have parked in the garden centre's car park, but I'm not going into it, so it just feels wrong to actually do that. So I've just left it on the road outside. Nothing wrong with doing that. Now our first job is to make our way to a cemetery, which is up this road here, a dead straight road that sort of flanks Bawdeswell village to the east. We're heading for that and then the village hall. There's a bit of walking to do to start with. First on our list in Bawdeswell, there's a cemetery to see, not far from the garden centre, where this walk will end in a short while. I haven't got a lot of information about this one. When I went to research it, I found far more about the local churchyard instead. Stick with me and you'll see why. Alright, we found our way to the village hall, which is behind me there. Very modern, this one. 2015, apparently, is the date on it. Let's have a bit of a talk about it, shall we?
So, we've come a long way north now, up to almost the furthest point away from the middle of the village. This is Bawdeswell's village hall, and its playing field, which sits side by side in these northern reaches. It's a fairly modern building as this, but it has a history to it. The whole thing began back in 1924 with the old parish room, which stood in a different spot. It was small and handy, but as the village grew, so did the need for a bigger space. This, the modern hall, came from a huge team effort. Grants rolled in from the big lottery fund, Breckland Council, the parish council, and several trusts. Local residents chipped in too, and eventually this building opened to the public. The hall became a CIO in 2020. The land it sits on is split between two groups. The piece holding the hall and Bowling Green sits under the old parish room charity, while the rest of the recreation ground belongs to the parish council. The whole site is used for sports, play, and day-to-day activities. The main hall has roof lights, a licensed bar, and big doors that open into the reception area. From there, you can see straight out to the patio and the play area. There are 2 extra rooms on the southern side, one for activities and one for meetings.
And then complementing that village hall, you have this massive playing field. I tell you what, this is half a decent size. There's a football pitch on it. There's some play equipment over here. There's some people on the swings and stuff over there, so I'm not going to go right into it, but you get the idea. They're all over there. There's a zip wire over there. What else have we got? There's a basket swing there, I think. Obviously got the flagpole in front of the village hall, which looks really nice. And then this, of course, here is the football pitch. Now, if you cross the football pitch, there's a path between these trees over here, and this will take us to our next area. There are 2 chapels to see in this next area. There's also the local shop. Bawdeswell once had 2 Methodist chapels, and both played their part in village life. The Wesleyan chapel went up in 1829 on the street and could seat around 130 people. We'll see that one in a little while. The primitive chapel arrived later in 1866 on Old Reepham Road, and this is it. The primitive chapel served Bawdeswell from 1866 until the 1950s and stood out thanks to its brick and flint build. During World War II, it suddenly became far more important thanks to what happened at All Saints Church, which had to be rebuilt. While that was going on, the primitive chapel became the temporary worship space for the Church of England congregation. By 1998, this chapel was a rented 3-bedroom house called Midsummer Cottage. Both this and its Wesleyan counterpart now live quiet lives as private homes. Bawdeswell is lucky enough to have a local shop, well, at the moment anyway. The store you see here is a branch of Morrison's Daily. The place has changed hands a few times. Back in the 1980s it was Bawdeswell Stores run by Andy and Shirley Batley, who kept it going for around 20 years. In 2007 the shop moved under McColl's, the big neighbourhood retailer, until McColl's ran into trouble. The company went into administration in 2022 and Morrison's stepped in, rebranding the shop as a Morrison's Daily. Since then, Morrison's has been reviewing all of its convenience stores. Some branches have struggled for a long time and rising costs have made things tougher. Because of this, Morrison's announced plans to close around 100 loss-making shops. A dozen stores in Norfolk are on the at-risk list, and this, the Bawdeswell branch, is one of them. So here's the other chapel. This was the Wesleyan chapel, which saw a lot of activity in its operational days. It even went through a major renovation in 1891, and a £50 debt in relation to that was cleared soon afterwards. Its associated circuits changed over time, moving from North Walsham Wesleyan to Aylsham, Bristol and Reepham after the Methodist Union in 1932. The Wesleyan reformers also had an impact, with some people leaving to run their own chapel for a few years. By the early 1900s, the Wesleyan chapel was the stronger of the two in Bawdeswell, but just like the primitive chapel up the road, its days were eventually numbered. Frustratingly, we don't know when this closed, but it's a house now, all the same. Okay, now we've reached Bawdeswell's church, and this is a building that's certainly been through the mill in its time. Here's Amelia to explain.
All Saints' Church has one of the most unusual and downright ridiculous histories of any church this channel has ever covered. This stands on a spot where there was once a previous church, medieval in date, and it's fair to say that early church had a rough old time. Its tower fell into the nave in 1739, leaving a huge mess. A brick church went up on the same spot to replace it, but that one didn't last either. It collapsed in 1828, so another new one was needed fast. A man called John Brown stepped in and built a fresh Victorian church. That version stood for years without too much trouble. People used the graveyard around it as normal, and the place felt settled. No one expected anything dramatic to happen, but the next big event would change the whole site forever. In 1944, an RAF mosquito bomber returning from Germany came down right on top of the church after icing up in clouds over Dereham. The crash wiped out the building in seconds. The blast scattered debris across the graveyard and left the site in ruins. It was a shock for the whole village. The damage was so bad that nothing could be saved except a cross that somehow stayed upright on the broken tower. That cross still stands by the porch today. So, with the church in ruins after the war, the village needed a new one again. Work began in the early 1950s, and a new flint church took shape between 1953 and 1955. Inside the new church, a plaque made from the wrecked plane remembers the pilot and its navigator. In all, Bawdeswell's church has been rebuilt more times than most villages ever deal with.
So you see what I mean? This is a church that's definitely had a storied past. It's fabulous though, to have a story like that. Not every village church does. And so I suppose it's got a bit of character, if you know what I mean. Now, speaking of character, there's a house very close to the church that's certainly characterful. It's this one here. That, my friends, is Chaucer House.
This house is perhaps the most famous one the village has to its name. Bawdeswell is well known to many, thanks to Geoffrey Chaucer, the man behind the Canterbury Tales. One particular tale mentions this village, although not quite by the same name. In the Reeve's tale, the Reeve himself came from Bawdeswell, which is noted as a small place in Norfolk. The Reeve was an estate manager in medieval times, and Chaucer paints him as sharp, thin, and very good at making money, often by bending the rules. The link to Bawdeswell is probably due to Chaucer's work as a royal tax collector, where he may have met a man called Thomas de Bawdeswell. And so this is Chaucer House, which is often tied to this link, but the truth is actually far simpler. The building is a late medieval timber-framed house from the 15th or early 16th century, long after Chaucer died. There is no proof he ever visited it. The name Chaucer House only appeared in the 1930s, when a new owner decided to celebrate the village's literary fame. Before that, it was known as Crown Farm or the Crown Inn. But even without a real link to Chaucer, the house is an impressive survival. Its jettied upper floor and timber frame make it one of the oldest buildings in the village. So here's a bit more about the Reeve's tale. It's the third of the Canterbury Tales, and it's told by Oswald the Reeve, an estate manager who rides a grey horse called Scott. He's annoyed in it because the miller in the previous tale mocked carpenters, so he fires back with a tale aimed at millers. His tale is based on a popular medieval cradle trick plot, where a cradle is moved in the night and chaos follows. It all centres on Simkin, a miller from near Cambridge who cheats customers using his golden thumb to tip the scales. He lives with his proud wife, their daughter Maline, and a baby boy. 2 students, John and Aline, arrive to stop Simkin from stealing their grain. Simkin spots their plan and releases their horse so he can rob them while they chase it across the fields. The students return furious and ask to stay the night. After drinking, the whole house falls asleep, and the students decide to get revenge. Alain goes to Maline's bed, and John tricks the miller's wife by moving the cradle so she climbs into the wrong bed in the dark. By morning, everyone is confused, angry, and shouting. The miller is hit by his own wife, thinking he is one of the students. Meanwhile, the students escape with their horse and the stolen bread baked from their own flour, laughing as they ride away. Chaucer also uses the students' northeastern accent in his work, making it the earliest written attempt to capture a regional English dialect outside the writer's own area. Scholars note that Chaucer's version is darker than earlier cradle trick tales. It's especially dark when you consider how Maline's night with Elaine is portrayed. Some argue she grows fond of him. Others say she never had the chance to consent, making the scene deeply troubling. Chaucer leaves the ending unsettled, with Elaine returning to Cambridge and Maline left behind, unsure what comes next. The tale mixes humour, cruelty, and sharp satire in a way typical of medieval fabliaux. The Reeve ends by saying the tale proves an old proverb. People who do bad things will eventually be tricked themselves. It goes something like this. Him tha nat when will that evil doeth. A guiler shall himself biggled be. Translated to modern English. That means, one who does evil fares badly. A deceiver will himself be deceived.
Okay, back to the more mundane stuff now, and between the church and Chaucer House there's a phone box, and it actually has a working phone in it. Not many of these left these days. Speaking of phones, next door to this there's a telephone exchange. The Bawdeswell Telephone Exchange next. This covers Foxley, Bylor and most of Sparham, as well as Bawdeswell of course. It's been part of village life for almost a century. Before it opened, the whole area relied on a rural party line linked back to Dereham. Calls were slow, shared and awkward. Everything changed though on the 4th of March 1930 when the new RAX5 exchange was switched on. The original exchange worked with early equipment that now feels ancient. It handled calls for several villages and kept things running through the mid-20th century. Broadband arrived in the 2000s and pushed the exchange into a new era. ADSL was enabled in November 2004, letting people get online through their phone lines. 2 years later, in March 2006, ADSL Max boosted speeds again. It was a big deal for a rural village, and it meant faster downloads. We all like those. Just up the road from that telephone exchange there's a cluster of buildings which all have the word old in their names. This one's perhaps the most interesting, this greenish coloured building here. That's the old harness makers. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Next door to that is an old bakery, this one here. And then behind me there's an old pub. It's the Old Black Horse. Now between here and the next landmark there's a fairish walk. Might do an ASMR section next.
primary school here was built in 1875 for the villages of Bawdeswell, Bylor and Foxley, and the whole thing was paid for by the Reverend Henry Lombay of Bylor Hall. His name sits proudly on the front, along with the motto Propositi Tenax. The building was meant to be solid, smart and ready for a growing village. It replaced the old boys-only school that had been running in the workhouse, next to the church, since about 1828. Other than that, Bawdeswell has had no other school in its history. Here, boys and girls were kept apart. They learned in separate classrooms and did not mix during the day. Even the entrances were split, with a door on each side of the building so pupils stayed apart from the moment they arrived. It was strict, simple, very typically Victorian schooling. The school site also included the schoolmaster's house next door, which played its own part in village life. It later became a pupil referral unit until 2006, before turning into a private home. Meanwhile, the main school building carried on through the decades, adapting as times changed. Today, the school has between 80 and 100 pupils and is part of the Synergy Multi-Academy Trust, based in Reepham. It still sits on the same site, still carries the same motto, and still stands as a reminder of the huge effort made by Henry Lombay back in 1875.
So the school's on a dead end these days, well, nearly on a dead end. You see here's the road that runs past Bawdeswell. It's the same one that we talked about yesterday in Foxley. And here you can get from the school out onto this road by using this little handy cut through. Now, when we finish this walk, we're going to be going down there to check out a couple of things which are sort of to the southwest of the main village. But before we can do that, we have to actually get back to the start and to the garden centre. Now, we're going to walk down this road for a short distance, and in a moment there'll be a path off to the left which goes into a housing estate. I'll do another ASMR section there, and then we'll end with the garden centre. Our walk ends now with Bawdeswell Garden Centre, which has grown into a big destination over the years. It began life as Bennett's Nurseries, but everything changed in June 1983 when Peter and Judy Underwood bought the site and turned it into a proper garden centre. The Underwoods kept expanding the site, adding a restaurant, a food hall and new retail areas. The Reeves Parlour restaurant became a huge draw, and big upgrades in 2012 and 2013 helped it cope with demand. By the time it reached its 40th anniversary, it was a busy, lively destination. In 2025, everything entered a new chapter when Cherry Lane Garden Centres acquired the site. Cherry Lane announced the deal proudly, calling Bawdeswell a long-established and much-loved centre that fitted perfectly into their growing group. It became the 22nd site in their portfolio. Okay, we've completed our journey around Bawdeswell. Well, sort of. We've done the walk, but as I said earlier, there's still a few bits and bobs to do before we leave this one behind. Now, what does the word hawky mean? Well, here in Norfolk, it means something very interesting. Let's go and find something that has that hawky name. So the walk may be done, but we still have a few more bits to cover. On the other side of the main road, you'll find the Hawkey Kitchen, which is a great go-to spot for breakfast, brunch and afternoon tea. It opened in 2023 when Lily Wade and George Wright took over the old Hamptons at the barn. The name Hawkey comes from an old East Anglian harvest celebration, and it ties the cafe to local farming history. A Hawkey was the feast held when the final cartload of corn was brought in from the fields. Farmers would put on a meal for workers and families to mark the end of the season. It was a lively event with singing, dancing and plenty of food and ale. One worker was even chosen as the Lord of the Harvest to lead the fun. The word Hawkey still carries a sense of local pride, and the cafe uses it to honour that past. It certainly gives the place a strong Norfolk flavour. Just up the road from the Hawkey there's Bawdeswell Heath, which has been talked about for a long time. It even popped up in the Canterbury Tales, where Chaucer mentioned that the reeve lived beside a green heath. Today the heath is tiny compared to what it once was. You see, 200 years ago, Bawdeswell sat in the middle of a huge open area running from Billingford to halfway towards Reepham. Everything changed though in 1808 when a private Act of Parliament enclosed the land around Bawdeswell and the heath shrank dramatically. In the same 1808 Act, 2 acres were set aside for gravel and 35 acres of woodland were left for the poor, forming the Bawdeswell Heath we know today. A committee of trustees still looks after it, keeping the last piece of the old heath alive for everyone to enjoy.
Lastly, we have to talk a bit about Bawdeswell Hall. This is a Grade 2 listed country house built in 1683 by Henry Eglinton, and it still carries that date on its Dutch gabled front. It's known for its Tudor-style chimneys and its unusual rough E-plan layout. The house has passed through several families, each leaving their mark. The Eglinton family owned the hall until 1748, when Thomas Jex bought it. After his death in 1761, the property passed through the Lloyd and Stoughton families, linking it to Bylor Hall and the parish of Sparham. By the early 20th century, the hall was ready for another major change in ownership. In 1912, Colonel Q. E. Gurney purchased Bawdeswell Hall, bringing it into the Gurney banking family, who are famously tied to Barclays Bank. The Gurneys added their own history to the house, including a portrait of Elizabeth Fry, the well-known prison reformer. That hangs on the main staircase. After Colonel Gurney's death, the hall passed to his son, and later to his grandson following a tragic riding accident. Between 2008 and 2009, the hall underwent major restoration work to bring it up to modern standards. But the building remains privately owned by the Gurney family and continues to be maintained with great care.
Well, what a village that one is. We began our walk on the quieter edges of Bawdeswell, where the cemetery sits not far from the garden centre. From there we pushed north to the village hall and the playing field, a modern setup built through grants and local effort. Heading back towards the centre, the story deepened. We passed the former Methodist chapels and All Saints Church, rebuilt after the 1944 mosquito crash that destroyed its Victorian predecessor in seconds. It's amazing how the surviving tower cross still stands. Stealing the show here, though, is the village's link to Geoffrey Chaucer's Reeve's Tale. It's so strong that it inspired the locals to even name a house after him. He might never have lived here, but he certainly left a mark in this pretty little Norfolk village.
And Fakenham, there's a place with a name tied to a well, in a village where the fields sit close to it all. Lovely Bawdeswell has you under its spell. On the road between Norwich and Fakenham, between the two, there's a place with a name tied to a well, in a village where the fields sit close to it all. Hey, yeah. Lovely Bawdeswell has you under its spell. And we walk that Norfolk road by the green where a sweet breeze rolls through. In Bawdeswell, steps feel packed with time. Oh, and the place keeps pulling you. Long ago, ancient scribes wrote its details. It had some simple land and a wide old spread. Later shops sat close together, busy all day. Lovely Bawdeswell, where the pub kept travellers fed. Long ago, ancient scribes wrote its details, wrote it down. It had some simple land and a wide old spread. Widely spread, shops sat close together, busy all day. Lots to do. Lovely Bawdeswell, where the pub kept travellers fed. Kept them fed. And we walked that Norfolk road by the green where a sweet breeze rolls through. In Bawdeswell, steps feel packed with time. Oh, and the place keeps pulling you. Foxley wood waits nearby with paths that twist through trees. Chaucer's name drifts through it like the birds and the bees. The crash changed things and a rebuild followed fast. Now the village stands with purpose, knowing well what will last. And we walk that Norfolk road by the green where a sweet breeze rolls through. In Bawdeswell, steps feel packed with time. Oh, and the place keeps pulling you. And we walk that Norfolk road by the green where a sweet breeze rolls through. In Bawdeswell, steps feel packed with time. Oh, and the place keeps pulling you. Lovely Bawdeswell, a place that keeps pulling you.
Hello folks, welcome back to Breckland for the last time this week and for the last time in this initial run. I will be back to Breckland again at some point in the future, but as far as this year goes, this is your lot, I'm afraid. Mind you, I have saved a really good one until last this week. In the church here, there's something which is quite spectacular, and Amelia's going to have a field day with it. They're called the corpse panels. I can't wait to see them, and I hope the church is open. There's a few other things in this village as well which we do need to talk about. One of them is right behind me here. That's an old pub. It's called the Old Green Man. You can find it and the corpse panels in Sparham. Sparham, homestead of Spar's people. Finishing off this first run in Breckland, we have Sparham, one of the highest villages anywhere in Norfolk, which is saying something given how flat this county can be. The village spreads across high ground with the hamlet of Sparham Hill rising even higher on the edge. The name Sparham is thought to come from Old English, most likely meaning the homestead of Spar's people or something close to that. It fits the place well because the village has always felt like a cluster of homes gathered on a ridge. Sparham goes right back to the Domesday Book, where it was listed as a large settlement with land, livestock and a decent population. Over time it grew, shrank and grew again in small ways. Farms came and went, tracks became roads, Sparham Hill developed along the turnpike. The landmark that defines Sparham best is the former Green Man pub. It stood on the edge of the village and worked first as a coaching inn and later as a busy roadside pub. The Hudson, Forby, Gaugin and Large families all ran it at different times. It closed in 1966. Elsewhere, the old schoolrooms stand next to St Mary's Church and date from 1852. They once held Sparham's National School, funded by local subscriptions. The two Methodist chapels, Wesleyan and Primitive, served farm workers for over a century before closing. Sparham also has a famous bit of folklore. In 1372, a girl fell and died on Sparham Hill. Her family walked barefoot to Ling to pray at the chapel of St Edmund. The tale says she recovered, and people have repeated it for generations. The village has had its share of notable names. William Mustarder, rector in the late 1400s, is remembered by a brass in St Mary's Church. The Sayer family, owners of Sparham House in the 1900s, left their mark on the church through memorial glass. Current issues here tend to focus on roads and walking routes. The A1067 runs right beside Sparham Hill, and the lack of a proper footpath has caused concern for walkers using the Wensum Way. Traffic moves fast, and people have continually raised safety worries. Farming was the main employer out here for most of its past, with fields, livestock and seasonal labour shaping daily life. The Green Man offered work too, as did the school and the chapels in smaller ways. Today, farming still plays a part, but most people travel to nearby towns. And so, this is Sparham, where there's more than you might think to catch your eye. Walk into the church, for example, and you'll be met with a startling set of painted panels, and it's those that will steal the show today. Let's go.
Hey people, I've just got the one thing on my agenda today, but it's by far the best thing Sparham has to offer. It's St Mary's Church, with its amazing corpse panels. Andy's on the rest. See you in a while.
Okay, so we've driven to our start point, and behind me there you can see the old Green Man. Now this is the old pub that's on the main road through Sparham from east to west. We'll deal with this first, and then we'll drive into the village proper and deal with the rest of it. That's where you find the church and the old school, and there's a chapel as well. There's all sorts of things to cover. I still can't wait to get to those corpse panels. Let's deal with this first though. On the edge of Sparham is our first landmark, and it's an old pub. This was the Green Man, which a lot of people knew very well. It began life as a coaching inn and later worked as a busy roadside pub. It finally closed in 1966, and it's now a house called the Old Green Man. The place passed through many hands, but the same names kept popping up. The Hudson and Hudson families were here for ages, a run that started way back in 1768 or maybe even earlier. John Hudson's widow, Anne, later married Benjamin Helsden, who kept things going until his death in 1792. By the early 1800s, the Forby family were in charge. Thomas Forby appeared in the 1794 licence list, and his son John took over after him. Anne Forby lived here for upwards of 80 years and died aged 91. Things slowed down in the mid-1900s. Beer sales dropped to just over 300 barrels in its final year. In the main village now, this here is the old schoolrooms. Sparham School first opened in 1852, right next to St Mary the Virgin's Church. It was a simple place with simple aims. The building went up during a time when the Earl of Leicester owned most of the land around Sparham. Money for the school came from local subscriptions, so people chipped in what they could. It worked as a national school, which meant it followed the usual church-based approach of the time. As bigger schools opened in nearby places, Sparham's little school began to feel a bit old-fashioned. Numbers dropped and eventually the doors closed. Instead of being left empty, the old school became the old school rooms, a place for local small gatherings and parish meetings. You can still tell what it was though, owing to its shape. I've just seen something that's completely made my day. Look at this. We're at the gates of the church, and the church is apparently open. This is good. It means we can get to see the corpse panels. Right, let's get into this churchyard. The gate was a bit stiff. Here we are. Here's the church. This itself is a very impressive building, and there's quite a lot to talk about with it. But of course, now that we know it's open, the main event is inside.
St Mary, the Virgin's Church, is a big, eye-catching building for such a small place, and it sits high upon one of the loftiest spots in Norfolk. The building mixes parts from the 1300s and 1400s. It looks a bit mismatched, but that is part of its odd appeal. The chancel is the oldest bit, built in the early 1300s, long and low and slightly out of scale with the rest. The nave, the aisles and the tower were rebuilt in the 1400s, when local merchants had money to spend. Inside, the two western arches are wider than the others, because the builders tried to stretch the nave to meet the new tower. Mismatched it may be, but this one is bright and open. Most of the glass is plain, so the light pours in. The chancel on the inside feels just as unusual as it does on the outside. The blank arcading leads you towards a simple sanctuary, with glass from 1948 by Terence Randall. It shows Christ in Majesty with St Michael and St George, and remembers squadron leader Arthur Sayer, who died in 1944. More glass was added in 2007 by Emma Blount, showing the Tree of Life in memory of his brother. The church also holds a brass to William Mustader, a rector who died in 1490. It lies near the altar and shows him in full vestments. His brass sits close to the church's most famous feature. By far, St Mary's is most famous for the corpse panels. They are painted panels which date from around 1480 and once formed the base of the rood screen. They sit on the north aisle wall and feel like a message from another age. The paint is worn, but the scenes still pack a punch. They deal with life, death, and the short gap between the two. The first scene shows a shrouded corpse rising from a tomb and pointing straight at the font. It is a blunt reminder that life begins at the font and ends in the grave. The second scene is even stranger. That one has a male and a female skeleton standing in a meadow, dressed in fine clothes, and the woman is offering a flower to the man. The Latin lines beside them come from the Book of Job and talk about how short life is and how fast beauty fades. The panels were damaged during the Reformation, as the faces were scratched and the eyes were gouged. Oddly, this makes the scenes even more unsettling. Some historians think the panels may have acted as a sort of stand-in tomb for the person who paid for them.
I'll tell you something, even if the corpse panels weren't a thing here, this church is still well worth visiting because of its size. It's huge for a very small village in Breckland, in this part of Norfolk. You'd expect it to be tiny. You really would. You'd expect to find a really small church. But this is cavernous. You walk in and you're just met with this massive, huge nave. You know, looking up there, it's quite a long way. It's a nice pink light coming through those windows there. It's kind of giving the walls a bit of a pink hue. They're supposed to be white, but they look pink. This is an amazing church, and of course the corpse panels are the star attraction. But don't let that put you off looking around the rest of it. Absolutely fabulous church, this. Sparham once had two Methodist chapels and both were busy places in the 1800s. Because this village sat in the Breckland fields, the chapel drew in a lot of farm workers. The Wesleyans arrived first in 1843 and the Primitives followed in 1864. Each had its own building, its own style and its own way of doing things. The Primitive Methodist Chapel opened on Church Lane and stayed active right into the 1960s, but numbers slowly dropped. Today it's a house called the Old Chapel. The Wesleyan Chapel ran for more than 100 years, but like the Primitive Chapel it faced falling numbers as the years rolled on. It closed at some point before 2008 and similarly no longer works as a place of worship. That chapel you've just seen there is on the street, which is, I suppose, Sparham's main road. It's right at the other end of it. The church is sort of at the beginning of it, the other end. So I've walked from one end to the other and there's no real way to make a circle here, so I'm just having to walk back the same way from whence I came. Now, as I was walking up the street, I spotted something at a house just up here on the, it was on the right hand side, it's on the left now. It's not this house here, it's the next one. You see these trees? I'll show you when we get to it. I'll keep the camera rolling. It reminded me of something we did in Lancashire last year, towards the back end last year. Do you remember when we did that first run in Ribble Valley? We saw the house that's lived in by the Bishop of Blackburn, didn't we? Well, here, Holly Tree House, this one here, is apparently the residence of the Archdeacon of Lynn, and I didn't know that until about 5 minutes ago. How about that? Okay, so to finish with here, there are two small hamlets to cover before we leave Sparham alone. One of them is called Pockthorpe, a tiny little place that shares its name with a suburb of Norwich. The two should not be confused. The suburb has far more history than this little place. I found zip for this. The other hamlet is Sparham Hill, right beside the A1067, and it feels like its own little spot, even though it's part of the main village. It stands on one of the loftiest points in Norfolk, so you can see for miles around here. One of the most famous tales linked to Sparham Hill dates from 1372. It concerns a girl, her age unknown, who fell and died here, and her family were understandably heartbroken. The story goes that they walked barefoot down the hill to Ling, heading for the chapel of St Edmund. There they prayed, hoping for help, and miraculously, even though the girl was dead, she's said to have recovered. It's become one of those local bits of folklore that everyone knows around here now, and if you don't, well, you do now. The area around Sparham Hill is full of old features. Sparham House, once called Sparham Hall, sits nearby, and it has a long past. It was owned by the Cokes of Holcombe and later by the Earls of Leicester before the Sayre family bought it in the 1900s. Today, Sparham Hill is also known for walking routes like the Wensum Way. Walkers have to be careful though, especially near the road. Even so, the hill remains a popular spot, and it still feels like a place with a long past and plenty of character. And so, we've come to the end of Sparham, the village where those corpse panels remind you that no matter who you are, you cannot escape death. Well, unless you're that girl who lived in 1372, obviously. They are eerie, bold and unforgettable, and they give Sparham something that you don't get in most villages.
Sparham sits high on a Norfolk rise, old paths running under open skies. Doomsday lines still guide the ground, 36 homes once tightly bound. St. Mary's Tower stands tall and bright, catching the sweep of the morning light. Those painted bones in the panel frame give the old church its lasting fame. Sparham on the ridge, holding its place, age in the fields, time in the space, wind on the tower fields rolling near. Sparham keeps its footing year after year. Dum-dum-di-dum. Old English words gave the village its name. A homestead marked by a simple claim means 4 tides. In the Norman age, 3 lords written on an ancient page. William Despard walked these roads. Geoffrey followed with his own loads, each left a trace in the written past. Names on parchment built to last. Sparham on the ridge, holding its place, age in the fields, time in the space, wind on the tower fields rolling near. Sparham keeps its footing year after year. Earls of Leicester held the land, farmers worked where they would stand, plows cut lines through rising ground, season by season a rhythm was found. Now the village keeps a steady pace, footpaths winding through open space, old tales presented in painted bone, giving the church a lasting tone. High ground calling, sky stretched wide, Sparham standing with a lot of pride. High ground calling, sky stretched wide, nothing rushed and nothing denied. Sparham on the ridge, holding its place, age in the fields, time in the space, wind on the tower fields rolling near. Sparham keeps its footing year after year. Dum-dum-di-dum.
Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.